The heavy weight of secrecy had been smothering the air for weeks, but it was tonight that it would finally suffocate the walls. At the altar, under the glare of flickering candles, Evelyn stood, her breath quick and shallow, her heart hammering. She wore the wedding dress like armor, her smile a fragile mask. Beside her, her betrothed Lucas looked every bit the charming prince. But something was wrong. As the vows began, her eyes locked on the guest in the second row, a stranger, his gaze dark and intent. She knew him. Or, rather, she thought she did. "I thought you were dead," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. Lucas' hand tightened around hers. "What is it?" he asked, but she didn't hear him. The stranger's lips barely moved, but she caught the words. "Your brother is alive." Her knees buckled, and everything went black. Evelyn's heart raced as the words, "Your brother is alive," echoed in her mind. The chapel had gone silent, the weight of the revelation too heavy to bear. Her body felt as though it was no longer her own, her limbs numb, her thoughts racing. She turned to Lucas, her fiancé, but his presence now felt distant, like a stranger. "What is it, Evelyn?" Lucas asked, his voice filled with concern, but it was drowned out by the pounding in her ears. Her gaze returned to the man in the second row, the stranger, whose eyes locked onto hers with a familiarity that made her stomach twist. "I need to leave," she whispered, almost to herself, as a cold sweat broke out on her skin. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the truth she had denied for so long suddenly became real. Evelyn felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, the room spinning around her as the weight of the truth settled heavily on her chest. She staggered backward, but before she could fall, Lucas caught her by the arm. His voice was frantic, but it barely reached her through the fog of shock. "Evelyn, what's happening? You're scaring me." She blinked rapidly, trying to regain control of her breathing. She hadn't seen him in 5 years. How could he be alive? She had seen the body, had mourned him. I need to go," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper, but Lucas held her tighter. "Not like this. You're supposed to be my wife," he pleaded. But Evelyn's mind was already far away, lost in the memories of her brother, the brother she thought she had lost forever. Outside, the cool night air hit Evelyn's face, but it did nothing to clear the fog in her mind. She walked quickly down the narrow alley, her steps fast and erratic, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling of the stranger's eyes on her, or the words that haunted her. "Your brother is alive." She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what she was doing, but she couldn't stand still. Her wedding had just fallen apart. Her world had just been shattered. She turned a corner sharply, and there, standing against the wall, was the stranger. His face, now clearer in the moonlight, sent a chill down her spine. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about him, something familiar, yet frightening. "You're real," she whispered, as the world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The stranger stepped forward, his face softening as he looked at Evelyn. His eyes, dark and full of sorrow, locked with hers. "Evelyn," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of years lost. "I never wanted you to find out like this, but I had no choice. I had to keep you safe." Her breath caught in her throat. "Safe?" she repeated, her voice breaking. "From what? From who?" The stranger hesitated, a flicker of something painful crossing his face. "From them. From the ones who made sure you thought I was dead." Evelyn felt her knees buckle. She had never asked for this, never asked for a life full of lies. She wanted to scream, but all she could do was whisper, "Who did this? Who did this to us?" His lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes narrowing as he glanced down the alley. "I can't explain everything right now, but I promise you I'll help you. We can fix this." Evelyn's mind raced as she stepped out into the cold night air. The streets were empty, the city holding its breath in the quiet of the hour. Her fingers clutched the edge of her wedding dress, her heels tapping lightly against the cobblestone. Her thoughts were a storm of confusion and fear. How can he be alive? She asked herself over and over, but the question only twisted her gut tighter. The stranger's words haunted her, and now, Under the cold moonlight, all she could think about was the brother she lost so long ago. Elliot, she whispered, his name trembling on her lips. She had to see him, had to know if it was true. The faint echo of his laughter, the way he held her hand when she was scared, all of it was coming back. But what if this man was lying? What if it was just some cruel trick? Her footsteps quickened, her heart pounding as she searched for the answers that had been buried for so long. Evelyn found herself standing in front of an old, dilapidated house, one she hadn't seen in years. The paint was peeling, and the windows were cracked, but she could still feel the echoes of laughter and the warmth of family within those walls. This was where she had grown up, where she had last seen Elliot. She could remember the way he would sneak into her room at night when they were kids, whispering jokes and telling stories about their dreams. "We'll always protect each other," he had promised, that bright smile of his lighting up the world. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stood there, unsure if she was ready to confront the past. Was it really him? Was he waiting inside, just as lost as she was? The door creaked open slightly, the air around her growing heavier. The door swung open with a creak, and a figure appeared in the doorway. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. The man before her had the same dark eyes as the stranger in the chapel, but this one was different. He wasn't a stranger at all. Evelyn. His voice cracked as he spoke, the sound so familiar it nearly shattered her. It was him. Her brother. Elliot. His face had changed, the boy she once knew now a man, but there was no mistaking that voice, the way it wrapped around her like a forgotten memory. She gasped, her hand reaching out as though she might touch the dream she never thought would come true. "I thought you were dead," she whispered, her voice trembling as tears streamed down her face. How could they say you were gone?" Elliot stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "It's a long story, Evie," he said softly. "One I never wanted to tell you." His voice was thick with emotion, the words heavy with years of pain. Evelyn didn't know what to say. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was stand there, staring at him as if he might vanish again. "I don't understand," she whispered, stepping forward, her breath shallow. "Why did you leave me? Why did you let me think you were dead?" He shook his head, his hand reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. "I didn't want to, Evie. I had no choice, but I'm here now, and I need you to trust me." The air between them crackled with the weight of everything unsaid, everything they had both lost. Evelyn's hand trembled as she reached for the doorframe, her body feeling numb as though her mind had yet to catch up to the truth standing before her. The years of pain, the years of wondering, had all led to this moment. She wanted to scream, to ask why he had disappeared, why he had left her alone. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply asked, "Where were you?" Elliot's eyes softened, a deep sadness overtaking his features. I was taken," he confessed, his voice shaking. "By them, the people who controlled everything. They made sure you thought I was dead, and I had no way of reaching you, of telling you I was still alive." Evelyn's knees buckled slightly, and he caught her by the arm, holding her close. "I'm so sorry, Evie," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." The revelation of Elliot's survival shattered the fragile peace Evelyn had built. Her brother was alive, yes, but the truth that followed was far darker than she could have imagined. The walls that had once separated them now felt like a prison. "Who did this to you?" she demanded, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. Elliot paused, the shadows of the past haunting his expression. "I don't have all the answers, Evie," he replied quietly, "but they controlled everything. They didn't just take me. They destroyed everything we knew." Evelyn felt the weight of his words sink into her chest, her heart pounding. "Who are they, Elliot? Who made you disappear?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with regret, and whispered, "The Alpha. He's the one behind all of it." The name hit her like a blow. The Alpha. She had heard whispers of him before, but never had she imagined the power he held, nor that her family was so deeply entangled in his web. Evelyn's mind raced as the words of her brother echoed in her head. The Alpha Dot. The figure who had been a ghost in the shadows, pulling the strings of her life without her even realizing it. She had always felt something off, something lurking just beneath the surface of her family's past. But this was a revelation she wasn't ready for. "You're telling me he's been controlling everything from behind the scenes?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elliot nodded, his face grim. "He's powerful, Evie. He has people everywhere, in every part of your life." His words hung in the air like a death sentence. Evelyn felt her chest tighten, her thoughts spiraling. How had they not seen it? How had they been so blind? "We need to stop him," she said, her voice steadying with newfound determination. "We need to put an end to him before he ruins everything." The plan to confront the Alpha seemed impossible, yet it was the only choice they had left. Evelyn and Elliot sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their next steps settling over them like a dark cloud. "We don't know where to start," Evelyn said quietly, her mind still reeling. Elliot turned to her, his face unreadable. "We start with what we know," he replied, his voice tight. "The Alpha doesn't operate alone. He has followers, people who help him maintain his power. We find them, we break them, and we get closer to him." Evelyn shuddered at the thought. "And what happens when we get too close?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. Elliot's eyes softened as he stepped closer, taking her hand. "Then we face him head on." His words were simple, but the implications were terrifying. They had no backup, no allies. Just the two of them against a man who could destroy everything they cared about. The following days passed in a blur of plans and action. Evelyn and Elliot went through old family records, searching for anything that might lead them to the Alpha's inner circle. Every clue they uncovered only deepened the mystery, and with each revelation, Evelyn felt her anxiety grow. They were getting closer, but the closer they got, the more dangerous the situation became. Late one night, as they sat in the dim glow of the study, a knock on the door made Evelyn's heart race. "It's him," Elliot whispered, his face paling. Evelyn stood up quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for the small dagger hidden in her belt. She knew the Alpha had people watching them, and now it seemed they had come to collect. Evelyn's heart raced as she moved toward the door, her hand tightly gripping the dagger. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Everything they had done, everything they had fought for had led them here. To the brink. She pulled the door open slowly, her breath caught in her throat. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall and imposing, dressed in dark clothing. His face was obscured by a hood, but his presence was undeniable. "Looking for something?" The voice was smooth, cold, and familiar. It sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. She glanced at Elliot, who had gone completely still. "No one moves," the figure commanded, stepping forward. The tension in the air was suffocating. They had been found. The figure in the doorway took another step forward, the shadows of the room swallowing his features as he stepped into the light. His presence was suffocating, like the calm before a storm. Evelyn's grip on her dagger tightened, her knuckles white, but her body remained tense, ready to spring into action. "You've come to finish what you started, haven't you?" Evelyn's voice was strong, though her heart hammered in her chest. The figure didn't answer at first. Instead, he removed his hood, revealing a face that Evelyn thought she would never see again. Her breath caught in her throat. "No, it can't be," she whispered. Standing before her was someone she thought she had lost forever, someone who had once been part of her life. "Elliot, tell me this isn't true," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But her brother didn't move. Elliot stepped forward, his eyes filled with an emotion Evelyn could not decipher. "I told you, Evie. I couldn't keep running. I couldn't stay hidden anymore." His words were calm, but there was an edge to them that sent a chill down her spine. Evelyn shook her head in disbelief. "But why? Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you warn me?" Confusion in her voice only made the weight of the situation heavier. Elliot's face faltered, a flicker of guilt flashing in his eyes. "Because I couldn't. I had no choice. He turned to the figure in the doorway, his gaze hardening. You made sure of that. The figure in the doorway, the one Evelyn thought was an enemy, stood silently, watching them both with a cold, calculating gaze. Evelyn took a step back, her mind reeling from the truth that had just unraveled before her. You've been working for him?" she asked, her voice cracking with betrayal. Elliot looked away, guilt washing over his features. "I had no choice, Evie. They threatened you. They threatened everything I love." He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "I was trying to protect you in the only way I could. I had to play their game, become one of them." Evelyn's world tilted. She had spent years believing her brother had been stolen from her, but the reality was worse. He had chosen this life. "So you're telling me you were never on my side, that everything we've been through—" She stopped, the pain too much to bear. She couldn't finish the sentence. The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. Evelyn could feel the tears threatening to spill, but she refused to let them fall. "I don't know who you are anymore, Elliot," she whispered, her voice trembling with hurt. "I don't know if I can trust you." Elliot stepped toward her, his hands raised in a plea for understanding. "Evie, please. I'm still your brother. I'm still the one who used to protect you." His voice cracked with emotion, but Evelyn could hear the desperation in it. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're not. You chose this. You chose them." The words were sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. She turned away from him, her heart breaking. Evelyn walked away, each step heavy with the realization that her brother had become someone she no longer recognized. The silence in the room was suffocating, but the anger that burned inside her was worse. She had been betrayed by the one person she thought would always protect her. As she reached the door, she turned to face him one last time. "If you really wanted to protect me, you would have come to me. You would have told me the truth," she said, her voice bitter with the weight of all the years lost. "You made your choice, Elliot. And now, so have I." With that, she stepped out into the cold night, leaving behind the remnants of a past she could no longer hold on to. Evelyn's breath came in sharp gasps as she stood in front of the Alpha's mansion, her heart pounding. The storm was nearing, the clouds darkening the sky above her, mirroring the turmoil inside her chest. The entire world seemed to hold its breath as she moved toward the iron gates, her hand clenched around the small weapon hidden beneath her coat. She had no idea what awaited her beyond those walls, but she knew it was time. Time to face the man who had destroyed her life, time to stop him once and for all. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her nerves. But the fear gnawed at her, threatening to break through. She had to be strong, for herself, and for everyone who had suffered because of him. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the gate open, stepping forward into the unknown. Inside the mansion, the silence was deafening. Evelyn moved through the grand hallways, her steps muffled against the marble floors. Every shadow seemed to watch her, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the stillness. She was close now, she could feel it in her bones. She had no choice but to confront him, to end this nightmare that had haunted her for so long. As she reached the door to the Alpha's private study, her heart skipped a beat. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. With a trembling hand, she pushed the door open, the final step in a long journey toward the truth. "You're here," a voice said from the shadows, low and filled with a quiet menace. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She wasn't alone. The door swung open fully, and Evelyn stepped into the room, her eyes immediately searching the shadows. The Alpha's study was vast, lined with shelves of ancient books and dark artifacts. A large desk sat at the center, papers and maps scattered across it. Behind the desk, the Alpha sat in his chair, his silhouette barely visible in the low light. Evelyn's breath hitched as his figure shifted, and the faint outline of his face came into view. "You should have stayed away, Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "But now that you're here, you'll never leave." His words cut through the air like a cold knife. She clenched her fists. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her chest. The time for fear was over. Evelyn took a step forward, the weight of everything that had led her here pressing down on her shoulders. You think you can control everything, but you're wrong, she said, her voice unwavering. The Alpha's lips twisted into a thin smile, his gaze never leaving hers. You're naive, Evelyn. You've always been naive. He stood slowly, the chair scraping across the marble floor, and began to circle her. His presence was suffocating, but she didn't back down. I've watched you for years manipulating your every move, pushing you towards this moment, he said, his tone cold and calculating. You never stood a chance. But Evelyn was done being a pawn. This ends tonight, she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. Suddenly, a movement in the shadows caught her eye. A figure emerged from the corner, and Evelyn's heart sank. It was Elliot. You didn't think I'd let you do this alone, did you? He said, his voice low and filled with a mix of regret and defiance. Evelyn looked at him, confusion flooding her thoughts. You've been working with him all this time? Her words were filled with disbelief, but there was no turning back now. Elliot stepped closer, his eyes filled with conflict. I was trying to protect you, he said, his voice cracking. But I see now. I see that you were right all along. He turned toward the Alpha, his expression hardening. I'm done with you. The Alpha's gaze hardened in response. You think you can walk away? It's not that simple. The room seemed to freeze as the final confrontation began. The tension in the study was suffocating. Evelyn's mind raced, but her body remained still. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the final battle between them about to begin. The Alpha stood in front of her, a smug grin tugging at his lips, but she could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He knew his time was running out. This is it, Evelyn. You can't defeat me, he said, his voice calm, almost patronizing. Evelyn shook her head, her fists clenched tightly by her sides. I don't need to defeat you alone, she replied, her voice steady. Because I'm not alone anymore. She looked to Elliot, whose eyes met hers, filled with a silent promise. They were in this together now. They would end this nightmare. Evelyn moved toward the Alpha, her every step purposeful. She could feel the power of her determination pushing her forward. You've done enough damage, she said, her voice low but fierce. It's time to end this once and for all. The Alpha's expression faltered, the confidence he once had slipping away. You think you can stop me? He sneered. You think I'm afraid of you? But Evelyn wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced him before, and she knew his weaknesses. With every word she spoke, the grip he had on her life loosened. She could see it in his eyes, the realization that his reign was over. You were never invincible, she said, her voice filled with conviction. Not with the truth on my side. Elliot stepped forward, standing beside Evelyn. His voice, once full of regret, was now filled with resolve. This is my fight too, he said, his eyes locked on the Alpha. You made me a part of this world, but I'm done with it. I choose her. I choose the truth. The Alpha's face twisted in anger as he turned to Elliot. You're a fool, Elliot. You think you can walk away from me? You think you can just abandon everything we've built? Elliot didn't flinch. What we built was built on lies, and I'm tearing it all down. With those words, the room seemed to grow colder, the final act of defiance unfolding before them. Evelyn could feel the strength of Elliot's commitment beside her, and together they would bring down the man who had haunted their lives for so long. The Alpha's demeanor shifted, the calm mask he had worn for so long slipping. His hands clenched into fists, his voice rising. You think this is over? You think you can just erase everything I've built? He took a step toward them, his movements quick, but Evelyn stood firm. It's already over, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Your power crumbled the moment the truth came out. Your reign ends here. The Alpha took another step, but this time he was met with nothing but the steady, unwavering resolve of the siblings. There was no more fear, no more doubt. This was the end, and the world would finally know the truth. With a final decisive motion, Evelyn reached out, her hand steady as she grabbed the letter opener from the desk. "This ends now," she whispered as she moved to the Alpha's side. He didn't flinch, but his eyes told the story. His time was over. Evelyn could see the defeat in his eyes, the realization that the power he had once held was slipping away. In that moment, the door to the study burst open, and the authorities stormed in, the truth of his crimes finally catching up to him. Evelyn stepped back, her heart pounding as the Alpha was taken into custody. "It's over," she whispered to herself, the weight of years of pain and fear lifting from her shoulders. The silence that followed the Alpha's arrest was deafening. Evelyn stood on the steps of the mansion, her body still feeling the tension of everything that had transpired. The weight of the past few days hung over her like a storm cloud, but there was a flicker of hope in her heart. She turned to Elliot, who was standing beside her, his expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "It's finally over," she said, her voice quiet, as if afraid to believe it. Elliot nodded, his eyes locked on the horizon. "Yeah, it's over. And now we can rebuild." Evelyn's gaze turned toward the distant sky, the first rays of dawn breaking through the darkness. For the first time in years she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The truth had set her free. As the days passed, Evelyn found herself walking through the streets of the city, the place that had once been a symbol of her loss now feeling like a place of new beginnings. People greeted her, some with smiles, others with nods of understanding. The weight of the Alpha's influence was slowly fading, and the city was starting to heal. She paused at a small cafe, the familiar sights of her childhood now feeling comforting instead of oppressive. As she sat down, she took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the years slowly lift off her shoulders. The world was no longer controlled by shadows. "How's the city?" Elliot asked as he sat across from her, his smile genuine. "Better," she said softly. "A lot better." Later that evening, Evelyn walked along the path near the lake, the reflection of the moon shimmering on the water. It was a place she used to visit with her brother when they were children, a place of escape. Now, it was a place of reflection. As she stood there, the cool night air brushing against her face, she thought about the journey she had been on. It had been filled with pain, betrayal, and loss, but it had also brought her strength, resilience, and a new understanding of who she was. She wasn't the same person who had stepped into that chapel, vulnerable and unsure. She was stronger now. And as she looked up at the stars, she whispered a promise to herself: no more hiding, no more fear. Evelyn stood in front of the old house, the place where so many of her memories had been born. It no longer felt like a prison. The door opened behind her, and she turned to see Elliot standing there, his expression soft. "Are you ready to go inside?" he asked. Evelyn nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "It's time," she said. As they walked through the door together, the house seemed to come alive again, the shadows no longer heavy, but filled with the promise of new memories. The past had been painful, but it had also shaped them into who they were. "We'll rebuild this together," Evelyn said, her voice filled with hope. Elliot nodded, his smile matching hers. Together. The last few days had been a blur of new beginnings. Evelyn stood on the balcony of the house, watching the sunset as the city beneath her hummed with life. She had come so far, through the darkest of times, and now she stood at the threshold of something new, something bright. As she felt the cool breeze on her face, she closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of peace. No longer burdened by the past, she was free. "Evelyn, Day." She turned to see Elliot standing in the doorway, his eyes warm. "You've come a long way," he said softly. She smiled, her heart lighter than it had ever been. "We both have," she replied. And for the first time in a long while, she believed in the future.